Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to hold everything together when everything inside you feels like it is falling apart? What if the strength you have spent your whole life building is actually the very thing keeping you exhausted? If you have ever felt tired, profoundly tired, of being the one who never needs help, the one who always smiles through the storm, this is for you. Stay until the end, because the final lesson may change the way you see this pain forever. 1. The weight of the armor we wear. Here is the truth few people want to face. The tighter you hold the shield, the heavier your life becomes. For so long, you have been the strong one, the one people turn to when things go wrong. You are the listener, the problem solver, the rock. You are the one who says, "I am fine," even when your heart feels heavy and your spirit is deeply drained. You swallow your sadness because you do not want to burden others. You hide your exhaustion because you fear that if you drop the ball, no one else will catch it. You have convinced yourself that needing others is a weakness, and that true safety lies in absolute self-reliance. But Buddhist wisdom teaches us something very different about true strength. In Buddhist thought, suffering often comes not from our circumstances, but from our deep attachment to an identity. In this case, the identity of the unbreakable one. We cling to the idea that we must be solid, unbending, and perfect. But Buddhism reminds us that all things are fluid, all things change, and holding on to a fixed, rigid image of yourself only creates tension and pain. Imagine a warrior who never takes off his armor. At first, the iron plates protect him from the arrows of the world. They give him a sense of safety on a chaotic battlefield. But eventually, the battle ends. The sun goes down. Yet, out of fear, he refuses to remove the heavy metal. Over time, it is not the enemy that breaks him, but the crushing weight of his own defense. The armor rusts. It restricts his breathing. He cannot feel the wind on his skin or the warmth of the sun. He is safe, yes, but he is entirely trapped by his own protection. Think about your own life. How often do you wear this heavy iron in your daily interactions? At work, when you take on more than you can handle because you cannot say no. In relationships, when you smile and nod, burying your own needs so someone else can feel comfortable. You carry the emotional weight of your family, your friends, and your own quiet expectations. You walk through the world wrapped in heavy steel, wondering why you feel so profoundly tired. Ask yourself right now, what are you afraid will happen if you finally set the armor down? Who would you be without the heavy iron of having to appear strong all the time? Pause, breathe, observe the thought without following it. Let the question sit in the quiet spaces of your mind. Do not judge yourself for feeling tired. Just notice the immense weight you have been carrying for so long. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be human. True peace begins the moment you realize that pretending to be invincible is not a sign of strength, but a mask for a deep and quiet fear. Because underneath every heavy shield is a fragile heart, afraid of being seen. And this is where the next truth begins. 2. Why we fear our own fragility. What if the parts of you that you try hardest to hide are actually the only parts capable of finding peace? Here is a quiet truth about human nature. We are deeply terrified of our own fragility. We live in a world that rewards toughness, speed, and endless endurance. So, when sadness visits, we quickly wipe away the tears. When loneliness sets in, we distract ourselves with noise. When we feel overwhelmed, we push through, telling ourselves that resting is giving up. We treat our emotional wounds like secrets that must be locked away in the dark. You worry that if you show your cracks, people will see you differently. You fear that if you finally admit how tired you are, everything you have built will simply collapse. But Buddhist wisdom offers a gentle correction to this fear. In Buddhist thought, suffering multiplies when we reject reality. When a painful emotion arises and we say, "I should not feel this way," we split ourselves in two. We go to war with our own inner life. The teachings remind us that all emotions, both the light and the dark, are simply passing weather. They are not who you are, and they are not enemies to be defeated. Imagine a tall, ancient tree standing in the middle of an open field. When a massive storm rolls in, the dark clouds gather, and the fierce winds begin to howl. A tree that is entirely rigid, a tree that refuses to move, will eventually be snapped in half by the violent force of the wind. Its own stiffness becomes its downfall. But a willow tree knows the secret of survival. It bends, it yields to the wind, it allows its branches to be tossed and swept, knowing that the storm is not permanent. Its strength is not in its resistance, but in its profound flexibility. Apply this to your everyday life. When someone asks how you are, and you feel a heavy lump in your throat, but you force a bright smile and say, "I am just busy," that is the rigid tree. When you lay awake at night, feeling a deep ache of loneliness, but you grab your phone to drown out the silence, instead of sitting gently with your own heart, that is the rigid tree. We are so afraid of breaking that we completely refuse to bend. Ask yourself, what are you fighting so hard to suppress right now? Are you carrying a quiet sorrow that simply wants to be felt? Are you holding on to an exhaustion that is begging for rest? Pause, breathe, stop trying to force the door closed on your own feelings. When the sadness comes, let it come. When the tiredness falls over you, sit down with it. Let the feeling rise, without making it your identity. You are not your exhaustion. You are the vast sky in which the exhaustion is temporarily floating. You do not need to be made of stone to be safe. In fact, it is the stone that shatters, while the water simply flows. But accepting your own fragility is only a piece of the puzzle, because stepping out of your heavy armor often brings up another deep-seated fear. And this is where the next truth begins. 3. The illusion of total self-sufficiency. What if the walls you built to keep out the pain are the very walls keeping out the love? Here is a truth that is difficult to swallow. You have convinced yourself that needing others is dangerous. Somewhere along the way, life taught you that depending on people leads to disappointment. So, you made a silent vow. You decided you would handle everything yourself. You manage your own problems. You carry your own burdens, and you dry your own tears. You take pride in never asking for a favor. But this extreme independence is an emotional island. It leaves you secretly hoping someone will look close enough to see that you need help, even as your words fiercely push them away. You are profoundly lonely, not because you are physically alone, but because you will not let anyone see the parts of you that actually need support. One of the deepest lessons of Buddhism is the truth of interconnectedness. In Buddhist thought, the idea of a completely separate, isolated self is a painful illusion. Nothing in this universe exists entirely on its own. A flower cannot bloom without the sun, the soil, and the rain. We suffer deeply when we try to cut ourselves off from the natural web of life, pretending we are entirely self-contained. Buddhism reminds us that asking for help is not a failure. It is simply participating in the natural flow of human existence. Imagine a beautiful garden surrounded by a massive, impenetrable stone wall. The builder worked for years to place the heavy stones perfectly, aiming to keep out the harsh winds, the frost, and the wild animals. For a while, it worked. The garden was entirely protected from the outside world, but the wall was built so high that it eventually blocked the morning sunlight. It stopped the gentle rain from reaching the deep soil. Over time, the vibrant flowers began to wither. The green leaves turned dry and brown. The garden was perfectly safe, yes, but it was entirely alone, slowly starving in the dark. Think about how this walled garden exists in your modern life. When you are going through a difficult transition, a lost job, a quiet crisis, a period of deep exhaustion, and you immediately withdraw into silence, you isolate, you decline invitations. When a friend gently asks, "Can I help you with this?" and your immediate reflex is to say, "No, I have got it," even though you are quietly drowning under the weight of it all. We confuse isolation with strength. We falsely believe that asking for a hand makes us a burden, forgetting that the people who care for us actually want to help carry the load. Ask yourself right now, who are you keeping out? What are you afraid will happen if you allow just one person to see that you are carrying too much? Is this heavy stone wall bringing you peace, or is it only feeding your isolation? Pause, breathe. Notice the automatic reflex to push the world away. Stop trying to hold the sky up by yourself. You do not have to break down the entire wall today. Just open a small window. Let a little bit of light reach the soil. Do your part, then release the need to be invincible. Because true strength does not mean walking through the fire completely alone. Real peace includes the humility to say, "I cannot do this by myself today." But before you can feel safe letting others see you, you must first learn how to be a safe place for your own mind. And this is where the next truth begins. 4. Becoming a safe harbor for your own storms. What if the most dangerous place you run to when life gets hard is the harshness of your own mind? Here is a truth that is deeply uncomfortable to acknowledge. When you are exhausted from always having to appear strong, and you finally get a moment alone, you do not actually rest. Instead, you attack yourself. You criticize your lack of progress. You judge yourself for feeling tired. You lay in bed and replay every awkward conversation, every perceived failure, and every fear about the future. You feel intensely lonely, and then you punish yourself for feeling lonely. You seek refuge from the heavy demands of the world, but your internal dialogue offers absolutely no comfort. You have become your own harshest critic rather than your own gentle companion. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that true peace cannot be found if the mind is at war with itself. In Buddhist thought, there is a deep emphasis on loving kindness, which must always begin inward. If your internal environment is hostile, no amount of external silence or distance from others will bring you true rest. Buddhism reminds us that we must learn to become the quiet observer of our thoughts, offering them gentle hospitality rather than sharp judgment. Imagine a small wooden boat caught in a fierce, unpredictable storm out on the open sea. The waves are towering, and the wind is violent. The captain desperately steers the ship toward a hidden harbor, hoping to find calm waters and a place to drop anchor. But as the boat finally passes the breakwater, the captain realizes the water inside the harbor is churning with the exact same violence. Hidden rocks crash against the hull. The currents are wild and destructive. The boat cannot rest, because the shelter it sought is just as dangerous as the open ocean. Think about how this happens in your modern life. You finish an exhausting day at work. You close your door, step away from the people you have been quietly carrying, and you finally have a moment to yourself. You sit on the couch to recharge. But instead of resting, your mind immediately begins a chaotic spiral of overthinking. You worry about a deadline. You feel guilty for not doing enough. You panic about where you are in life compared to your peers. You retreated to the harbor of solitude, but your own mind has created a violent storm of self-blame. You are not resting. You are simply suffering in private. Ask yourself right now, when the world is heavy and you retreat into silence, is your own mind a safe place to land? Are you offering yourself the same deep grace and patience you so freely give to everyone else? Pause. Breathe. Notice how harshly you speak to yourself when you are already tired. Let the critical thought rise, but do not follow it down into the dark. You do not have to believe every harsh judgment your mind produces. When the exhaustion comes, sit with it gently. Be a calm and quiet harbor for your own tired heart. Because you cannot truly heal if you are constantly fighting your own shadow. Peace is not found by running away from the world. It is found by making a peaceful home within yourself. But creating that safe internal space requires a profound act of bravery. And this is where the next truth begins. 5. The courage to take off the mask. What if the person everyone admires is actually the person you are most exhausted by? Here is the truth few people want to face. You have carefully curated a version of yourself that is perfectly acceptable, successful, and always composed. You show up to work, to family gatherings, to social events, wearing a carefully constructed mask. People praise you for how well you handle things. They say, "You always seem so put together." But deep down, there is a hollow, persistent ache. You realize they do not love you. They love the performance you are giving. You feel completely invisible because the real you, the messy, unsure, deeply tired version of you is hidden away in the dark. In Buddhist thought, a great deal of our daily suffering stems from the gap between our true nature and the ego-driven image we project to the world. Buddhism reminds us that this constructed self is heavy, fragile, and ultimately an illusion. We suffer because we spend all of our life force defending a version of ourselves that does not even exist. True liberation comes from non-attachment, not just letting go of material things, but letting go of the desperate need to maintain an image. Imagine a celebrated actor who has played the same heroic character on stage for so many years that he forgets how to be himself. The performance is brilliant, the crowds cheer every single night, but eventually the play ends. He walks off the stage, yet he leaves the heavy makeup on. He wears the tight, uncomfortable costume to the market, to his home, to his bed. He is widely adored by strangers, but when he looks in the quiet mirror, he does not recognize his own eyes. The costume, which was only meant to be a temporary role, has become a permanent prison. Think about how this plays out in your modern life. When you sit in a meeting and nod confidently, even though you feel completely overwhelmed and lost. When you force yourself to be the bright, energetic friend at dinner, while quietly carrying a deep and silent grief. When you carefully hide your struggles, hoping for validation, while secretly feeling entirely empty inside. You are performing for an audience. But the performance is breaking you. The pressure to keep up the act is the very thing stealing your peace. Ask yourself right now, how much of your daily energy is spent just trying to look like you are entirely okay? What are you afraid will happen if you simply let the mask drop just for a moment and allow yourself to be seen exactly as you are? Pause, breathe, notice the tension in your jaw and your shoulders. You do not need to perform right now. Let the mask slip just in this quiet moment. Observe the immense relief that comes from simply being real. Do your part, then release the need to be perfect. You do not have to be an unbreakable character in someone else's play. You are allowed to be ordinary. You are allowed to be human. Because true freedom is the moment you decide you no longer have to pretend. But interacting with the world without your protective mask requires a new understanding of what it means to be strong. And this is where the next truth begins. 6. True strength is soft, like water. What if everything you have been taught about strength is completely backward? Here is the truth few people want to face. We have been conditioned to believe that strength means being hard. We think resilience looks like a clenched fist, a locked jaw, and an immovable stance. When life becomes difficult, your immediate reflex is to brace for impact. You tense up, you build walls. When you are criticized, you immediately defend yourself with sharp words. When a relationship gets complicated, you shut down and become cold. You believe that if you become dense and heavy like a stone, the world cannot break you. But existing as a stone takes an immense amount of energy. You are constantly bracing against the current, and eventually, the sheer force of life wears you down. Buddhist wisdom teaches a completely different approach to enduring the hardships of the world. In Buddhist thought, a great source of our suffering is resistance. When we harden ourselves against reality, we absorb the full, devastating impact of the blow. The teachings remind us that true resilience is not found in being rigid, but in cultivating a profound softness. It is the practice of non-resistance, allowing the mind and heart to remain open and fluid, even when the environment around you is harsh. Imagine a beautiful river flowing rapidly down a mountain. Suddenly, it encounters a massive, jagged boulder blocking its path. If the river were rigid, it would crash against the rock, expending all its energy in a violent, useless fight. But water holds the deepest wisdom. It does not argue with the boulder. It does not try to force the rock out of the way. Instead, it softens, it yields, it effortlessly flows around the obstacle, finding the paths of least resistance. And over time, it is the soft, yielding water that ultimately smooths the hard edges of the solid stone. Water is entirely soft, yet it can shape the earth. Think about how this applies to your everyday life. When you are caught in a bitter disagreement with a family member and you exhaust yourself trying to force them to understand your point of view, you crash against their stubbornness like a rigid object hitting a wall. Or when you face a deeply stressful season at work and instead of pacing yourself, you grind your teeth and try to force a solution through sheer willpower. You are trying to break the boulder, and you are draining your own life force in the process. We confuse tension with effort and rigidity with power. Ask yourself right now, where in your life are you behaving like a rigid stone? What situation or what relationship are you constantly crashing against? What would happen if you stopped fighting the boulder and simply allowed yourself to flow around it? Pause, breathe, drop your shoulders. Let the tension leave your hands. Stop trying to force the world to yield to your rigidity. Let the challenge exist without needing to violently conquer it. Do your part, then release the outcome. True power is not in how hard you can fight, but in how softly you can navigate the obstacles in your path. Because softness is not weakness, it is the ultimate form of endurance. But flowing gracefully through life requires you to deeply understand how to relate to others without losing your own peace. And this is where the next truth begins. 7. The space between independence and isolation. What if the freedom you fought so hard to achieve is actually just a different kind of cage? Here is a quiet truth about human nature. When we are hurt by relying on others, we often swing entirely in the opposite direction. You decided that needing people was too dangerous, too painful, or simply too disappointing. So, you built a life of absolute self-reliance. You manage your own responsibilities, you solve your own crises, and you process your own grief in the total silence of your room. You wear your independence like a glowing badge of honor. But there is a profound difference between choosing a peaceful solitude and being forced into isolation by your own deep fear. You pretend you do not need people, but in the quietest hours of the night, you deeply crave genuine connection. You have built a fortress so impenetrable that you are completely safe from being let down, yet you are entirely alone. Buddhist wisdom teaches us about the profound balance of the middle way. In Buddhist thought, deep suffering is often found in the extremes. The extreme of desperate clinging causes heavy pain, but the extreme of total detachment and cold isolation causes a very different kind of suffering. Buddhism reminds us that true non-attachment does not mean turning your back on the world, pushing love away, or pretending you do not need human warmth. True freedom is found in the gentle middle space. It is the ability to connect deeply with others, to give and receive care, without clinging to them out of desperation or pushing them away out of fear. Imagine two ancient, towering trees standing in a beautiful, vast forest. If they grow too closely together, their trunks twist into one another. They strangle each other, fighting violently for the same sunlight and the exact same patch of soil. This is the heavy extreme of clinging. But if one tree is planted entirely alone on a barren, rocky cliff, far away from the forest, it takes the full, brutal force of the wind. When a massive storm comes, it is easily uprooted. But the trees in a healthy forest stand beautifully in the middle way. They have their own clear space. Their trunks stand tall, strong, and completely independent. Yet, deep beneath the soil, out of sight, their roots are gently intertwined. When the great winds blow, they secretly hold each other steady. They are entirely whole on their own, yet deeply and quietly connected. Think about how this imbalance shows up in your modern life. You sit in your quiet room after a long, exhausting week. You are proud of the stable life you have built, but when a sudden sorrow hits, or when something incredibly beautiful happens, you hesitate to reach out. You realize you have trained everyone around you to think you do not need them. When a friend texts to ask how you are doing, your reflex is to give a short, polite answer and immediately retreat into your shell. You push love away before it even has the chance to disappoint you. You are confusing the coldness of a rocky cliff with the genuine peace of true independence. Ask yourself right now, are you truly independent, or are you just heavily defended? What are you afraid will happen if you let your roots touch the roots of someone else? Pause. Breathe. Notice the automatic urge to pull away when someone offers genuine care. Let the feeling of vulnerability rise, without immediately shutting the heavy iron door. Do your part, then release the fear of being let down. You do not have to give up your deep strength to accept a gentle helping hand. You can stand beautifully tall on your own and still allow someone else to share the weight of the storm. Because realizing you need people does not make you weak, it makes you beautifully human. But before you can fully accept the care of others, you must first learn how to stop abandoning the parts of yourself that are deeply tired. And this is where the next truth begins. What if your deep exhaustion is not a sign of failure, but a quiet plea from a part of you that has been completely ignored? Here is a quiet truth about human nature. We live in a world that glorifies endless motion. You have been taught that your worth is directly tied to your usefulness. So, when your body and your spirit scream for rest, you feel a deep, heavy guilt. You push through the ache. You make another list. You force a smile. And you force yourself to keep carrying the weight. You treat your own exhaustion as if it is an enemy to be conquered. You believe that if you just work a little harder or ignore the tiredness a little longer, you will finally reach a place where you can relax. But the finish line keeps moving. And in the process, you have entirely abandoned the most fragile, weary parts of your own soul. Buddhist wisdom offers a profound lesson on the necessity of radical compassion. In Buddhist thought, the practice of loving kindness is not just meant for the people around you, it must fiercely include you. We suffer when we identify solely with the active, doing parts of ourselves, while rejecting the quiet, resting parts. The teachings remind us that everything in nature operates in cycles of action and stillness. Winter is not a failure of summer. It is a vital and necessary retreat. When we refuse to honor our own need for rest, we violently disrupt the natural rhythm of our own existence. Imagine a beautiful, finely crafted wooden bow used by a master archer. The bow is incredibly powerful, capable of sending an arrow flying through the wind with absolute precision. But the archer knows a profound secret. When the practice is over, the archer immediately unstrings the bow. If the string is left tightly pulled day after day, the wood will eventually lose its flexibility. It will warp, it will weaken, and one day, under the slightest pressure, it will violently snap in half. The bow is not strong because it is always tense. It is strong precisely because it is regularly allowed to be entirely slack. Think about how you treat yourself in your everyday life. When you finally have a day off, but you spend it agonizing over all the things you should be doing. When your spirit is completely drained, but you force yourself to answer every message and attend every event just to keep up appearances. You are keeping the string pulled as tightly as possible, terrified that if you unstring the bow, you will lose your value. You feel a heavy, punishing guilt when you do absolutely nothing. You are confusing relentless tension with true power, slowly warping your own spirit in the dark. Ask yourself right now, what would it feel like to simply let the string go slack? What are you afraid will happen if you finally give yourself permission to be completely useless for a little while? Pause. Breathe. Notice the immediate wave of guilt that arises when you think about resting. Let the guilt rise, but do not obey it. Stop trying to prove your worth through your endless exhaustion. You do not have to earn the right to rest. You can simply lay down the heavy bow. Honor the parts of you that are deeply tired and offer them the same gentle grace. You so freely give to a friend in need, because true healing begins the exact moment you stop treating your own exhaustion like a failure. And this gentle surrender naturally leads us to the final realization of our journey. 9. Returning to a softer existence. What if the end of your exhaustion is simply the beginning of your true life? We began this journey by looking at the immense, crushing weight of the armor you wear. You have spent years playing the role of the unbreakable one. You built heavy stone walls to keep out the pain, only to realize those same walls were quietly keeping out the light. You pushed through the profound tiredness, terrified that if you finally admitted your own fragility, the world would simply collapse around you. You convinced yourself that total independence was the only way to be genuinely safe, leaving you entirely alone in a violent storm of your own making. You were profoundly tired of always having to appear strong, yet deeply terrified to be seen as weak. But as Buddhist wisdom has gently shown us, this exhausting cycle is only an illusion. You do not have to live this way anymore. You do not need to be made of heavy iron to survive the harshness of this world. True strength is never found in a clenched fist, a perfectly guarded heart, or a bitter isolation. It is found in the deep, quiet courage to be completely, imperfectly human. It is the wisdom to bend softly like the willow tree in the violent wind, to flow effortlessly like water around the jagged rocks, and to allow your heavy wooden bow to finally go slack. It is finding the profound middle way, standing tall as an independent tree, but allowing your roots to quietly intertwine with the forest around you. Think about the immense relief waiting for you on the other side of this lifelong performance. Imagine walking out into a quiet, open field just as the sun is beginning to set. The long, exhausting battle you have been fighting in your own mind is finally over. You stop running, you reach up, and one by one, you unbuckle the heavy iron plates you have carried for so many years. They fall to the soft earth with a quiet thud. For the first time in your life, you feel the cool, gentle wind on your bare skin. You are no longer heavily defended. You are completely exposed, yes. But for the very first time, you are completely free. You realize that you do not have to hold up the vast sky all by yourself. You can stand beautifully whole on your own and still allow someone else to gently take your hand. Ask yourself one final time, in the absolute quiet of your own mind, are you ready to stop fighting your own humanity? Pause. Breathe. Let that sink in. Notice the stillness available to you in this very moment. You do not have to force anything anymore. You can become a safe, warm harbor for your own tired heart. You can sit with your own exhaustion without offering a single harsh judgment. You can accept the deep care of others without losing your own inner peace. You no longer have to pretend that you do not need people, and you no longer have to abandon yourself just to keep them around. Because true peace is not a towering fortress you build to keep out the world. It is a quiet, open, beautiful space you create entirely within yourself. If these lessons touched your heart, share this video with someone who may need a little more peace today. You can let go now.